everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another edition of the show. It's the first episode of the new year. Took a little bit of a break after New Year's, but thank you for sticking with it, and thank you for listening in on another episode here. And there was something that happened recently that I kind of wanted to touch on, and the origin of the story and the topic aren't really sports related, but they lead me to wonder something about the broader sports journalism atmosphere. So, if you're on X, which is, as we all know, formerly Twitter, you are likely familiar with Grok, the AI chatbot that is in tweets and or posts as they're called now, and is created by XAI, which is Elon Musk's AI branch of his companies. And like any generative AI chatbot, Grok is able to generate images if you prompt it to. But because Elon Musk is this free speech absolutist, and if you really want to dive into how fraught his definition of that is, I highly recommend checking out Extremely Hardcore, written by Zoe Schiffer. It's a novel about Elon's takeover of Twitter. But he's this free speech absolutist, quote unquote. And so as a result, his AI has no guardrails, right? So if you were to position a sort of prompt that was nefarious with Gemini, Claude, um, ChatGPT, Perplexity, any of these other AI chatbots, the chances are it will probably say no and say, I can't do that. And with Elon's Grok product, those limitations don't exist. So what's happened is the most terrible example of that is the actress who plays Holly Wheeler in Stranger Things, who I believe is 13 years old, 14 years old. There was a screen cap of her, and somebody prompted Grok to like have her in a bikini or take off her top or something, and it was disgusting, right? And Elon hasn't really done anything to kind of talk about this and to condemn it, as far as I know. And this has led to a lot of countries in the EU kind of talking about banning the app because now people are have opened the floodgates to creating porn using this AI chatbot. And so that's been a push in the EU. For some reason, there is a growing momentum to get X kind of taken off the app stores as a result of this. Because if you think about it, OnlyFans isn't on the app store because it's adult content primarily, right? And so it doesn't pass the checks. But if you have a social media app that's now allowing you to generate porn using its AI, then then what's the difference really, in the grand scheme of things? So that's kind of what's going on there. But it prompted me to think about it in in this perspective, considering what X has become, considering what Elon has allowed the platform to devolve into, where you have a lot of racism on there, you have a lot of cyberbullying, and now you have this nefarious AI activity. Why is it that sports journalists, refuse to leave the app, right? What's happened now is that we're actually in, one could say, the most robust text based social media leveling of competition that we've ever had, right? Where you have X, you have threads from the Instagram team at Meta, you have Bluesky, you have Mastodon, and you have a couple other smaller ones after that that are trying to vie for attention in this kind of gap that happened once Twitter became X, and there's been different inflection moments of exoduses from that platform, and but all in all, sports journalists and reporters, beat reporters, they all stay on X primarily, and they have yet to leave. At least there are some who have left, but most of them have stayed. So, kind of want to talk into why they haven't left and what it would take to get them to leave. So, before we kind of get into the meat of that, let's kind of talk about the way that this became a thing, right? NBA Twitter specifically and NFL Twitter and sports Twitter at large kind of had this huge moment in the early days of Twitter because Twitter is a concept when it originally came out with 140 characters or less. While it was a social network, it wasn't exactly apropos to compare it to something like Facebook. It was really quick, short hitting text snippets, which was great for breaking news. So think about if you were running the CNN's Twitter page or ESPN's Twitter page back then, right? Breaking news story, this happened, and you could link out to the full article. And because Twitter allowed for notifications, you could really curate Twitter as your news app, right? If you followed a lot of these trusted sources. So what eventually started happening is that more and more beat reporters and journalists started joining this platform and the fans started following them because you're going to want to see the news as it happens, right? Again, because of that notification functionality. So for me as a Knicks fan, I would follow like somebody like Ian Begley or Fred Katz when he reported on the team, which has now been preoccupied by James Edwards III at the Athletic. You would follow them because they would break news on the platform, and then you could react and have a conversation about it. That is the kind of the golden age of NBA Twitter, and you saw it like it pervaded into linear TV because think about all those years NBA on TNT, they would kind of people would use the hashtag NBA Twitter, um, the hashtag NBA Twitter, and be able to show those on TV. So you would see people making jokes or sharing a GIF or making or weighing in on something, and the NBA and TNT guys would kind of take that, run with it, and keep it moving, right? And it became this gateway where different fandoms had communities. Again, to use the Knicks as an example, just because that's what I'm most familiar with. Knicks Twitter is a real thing. There's thousands of people who have conversations on there every day. They join Twitter Spaces. They've had a meetup in real life. I think this just this past summer, and it was a fostering of community of sorts. And you were able to kind of reach out to these beat reporters. You could tweet something at Mark Berman, and he might reply to you. You could tweet something at Ian Begley, he might reply to you or get into a conversation about something with you. And so it became a connective tissue part of fandom, right? To see what other people are talking about through NBA Twitter and through your specific team Twitter. And really, like, also player access became a thing. Like Kevin Durant, notoriously very active on Twitter. So you could reply to KD and maybe you get a response. And when he responded to you, your numbers kind of boosted up. People are looking at your account. So it was this intoxicating engagement platform as well if you were a sports fan. And again, I think somewhat that case. Some of it, as we'll get into a second here, has really devolved because of the way that Twitter and X has changed, right? And so the big thing with that is when he came over, Elon again, he wanted to level the playing field, and the way he did that was by kind of bastardizing the blue check. So before, and I remember doing this before X became X and it was Twitter before, where you would apply for verification. And basically, verification was a little blue check mark next to your name, which we see now. That means just by anybody who's willing to pay for it. But back then, it meant you were a person of note, a political figure, a celebrity, a nation, a news organization, or like it was given out to a lot of journalists. So it was actually them doing the reporting as a way to deter people from making fake accounts and posing as somebody else, right? And Elon came in and he's like, "Well, subscriptions are the way forward, and let's go ahead and allow people to subscribe for the blue check." And it started off as like $3, eventually became $7 for the basic one or something. And It allow I think actually the basic one without the check mark is still 3, but you have to pay 7 for the check mark. And the people who are, check mark users already verified, some, people like Stephen King, the author, they're like, "I'm not paying for this," like, their opinion was, "You should be paying me because I'm the one who's driving people to even want to use your website, use your app," right? So, but, the Twitter Blue thing happened, and it created this whole fiasco of people pretending to be accounts. Like the worst one I think was Eli Lilly, where somebody posed as that pharmaceutical company and said that insulin was going to be free, and then it caused their market cap to crater, right? So they kind of solved for that after the fact, but it kind of created this thing where blue checks meant nothing because you could just pay $7 and now you had a blue check, right? And that means you have higher priority engagement, you show up higher in the reply feed, minimize advertising. And Elon's whole thing is like, we don't want to rely on advertising, we want to subsidize our profits from the user. And while that's a good idea in theory, in practice, not so much because it took away the credibility of a lot of journalists in the sports space who relied on that blue check mark. And so now you can have somebody pretending to be Sham Sharania or Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport and breaking news, that's just done as troll engagement or whatever, right? So that happened. The algorithm changed, most notably when after one of the Super Bowls where Elon was mad that Joe Biden's tweet got more views than his did. So he's always re-engineering the algorithm to prioritize stuff that he's posting about. So when you have a social network that's kind of at the whim of the owner, you kind of follow the political winds of that owner, right? So right now, Elon is very much in a rightward pivot, maybe even libertarian pivot if you want to be nice about it. So a lot of conservative hate content gets boosted on the platform, and as a result, it's become incredibly hostile over the past few years. And you've had people hate it and want to leave, and a lot of people have left. Whether they only use Instagram, they've gone to the other platforms we mentioned before. And the crazy thing is that we have seen usage go down on X. So right now, as of September of last year, X and Threads had basically the same amount of daily active users, just over 130 million. And Threads is continuing to pick up momentum because it has the marketing machine of Meta behind it. Now, Bluesky, which has been kind of adopted as this new sans big tech sort of social media operation, is way behind. There's only like 3 to 4 million daily active users, but Threads has really picked up momentum on Twitter, on X. And, the user trends are more and more people are going there. Now, we've seen some sports personalities lean into using X style. The guys from Barstool, like Big Cat and Ryan Russillo, they use X, but Bill Simmons doesn't. Zach Lowe does a little bit, but not a ton. Shams has an account on both places, but he's going to break news on X first before he goes to Threads, and he has no zero presence on Blue Sky. So and we've had conversations before about NBA threads and about the NBA community on threads. I've jumped on podcasts to talk about people. It's very vibrant, it's very active, but it seems not active enough for journalists to commit full time to it. And again, you've seen exceptions. Mina Kimes does a good job of posting to all three platforms, for example, when it comes to the NFL. And but it just feels like for some reason, because of the lack of buy-in from these journalists, that you're not really getting that it moment with Threads or Blue Sky like you did with X in the NBA Twitter age. And like we saw at the NBA Cup final, Threads had a presence there, and they're doing all these activation events trying to get people over. It's happening, right? And there are a lot of journalists that are on Blue Sky, like Howard Beck is on there from The Ringer. Miran Fader, I believe, is on Blue Sky as well. So there are people who have gone there. Aaron Schatz is on Blue Sky; he's pretty active. So there is a small amount, but the local beat reporters have yet to do it, and that's the issue. So why is that? Why are they so unwilling to do so? And I think really it's a daunting task, right? It's easy for somebody like me who had like 1,000 or 2,000 followers on X before I kind of migrated off that platform to say, yeah, I'm good. Let me go ahead and, do something else. To take that into somebody who has hundreds of thousands or even a million followers to say, yeah, abandon that whole community that you've created there and start over, right? And I think that's why Threads is doing better than Blue Sky, because at the very least, Threads has the Instagram hook. So if your followers are on Threads who are also your followers on Instagram, you kind of migrate those immediately. They're automatically your followers, which is a smart piece of move, a smart move by Meta, I think. But that's really the collective issue. They're like, I'm losing this whole audience by doing this migration, and it's not like Instagram and X are going to play nicely with one another to allow you to take those people over seamlessly. So the whole struggle right now is is to get people to move. And I think like Colin Cowherd has said this before. He's like, yeah, I like the idea of a Blue Sky or a Threads, but why would I move when all my people are here? Right. I haven't seen a tremendous dip in my follower count. And when you're a higher profile journalist like that, a lot of times you'll just post and ignore. Right. So it stands to reason that the people who are driving the engagement on X still, as far as the sports space is concerned, those people are not the ones who are encountering the shit show that you get on that app on a daily basis. They're not seeing the Grok stuff because a lot of times, like you think about somebody like Skip Bayless, he doesn't follow anybody, right? So he just posts and then calls it a day, and sometimes he'll respond to the people that are interacting with him. But that's the issue because they're not going to really see the dilemma of this platform until they see the type of nefarious activity that's going on. And it is kind of, I would say, upsetting because a lot of people, they're just not seeing what the issues are here, right? Like not willing to make that slight sacrifice. And here's the thing, like if I asked this question on Threads the other day about what journalists that are still on X do you wish were here. And somebody said all the New York Giants beat reporters, like Art Stapleton is an example. And they, and I was like, it's a thing where the fans are there waiting for them. They just have yet to come over. It's why when I'm on Threads and I see somebody like Rosillo or Big Cat post, I always like their posts because I want them to notice that, hey, there is life after Twitter. But it almost feels like this sort of prisoner's dilemma that they have with it, where it's just like, well, I can't go over there because I leave all these other people back here, right? Like, do I lose a source? Do I lose the engagement for my articles? Do I lose this, that, or the third? And but it also sends a message that yeah, I might lose this, but I'm also staying. Do I really want to stay on a platform that really encourages behavior that I might not agree with? It just kind of, it's a wrestling mental moment where it's like for them, a lot of their job is tied to being on social media and interacting with fans and posing things out there to drive more attention into the clips, drive more attention into their programming. And it leads you to wonder what is actually going to change this, right? What could drive sports journalists to say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm done with this. Like, how bad does this have to get for them to say, yeah, you know what, this is actually a terrible place to be. I don't want to support this anymore, and so on. So is it a situation where athletes start deleting their accounts? Is it a situation where we have to see that daily average user number continue to tick up? Or is it a situation where we're just going to have to deal with this and hope that eventually you get people coming over? I think the real issue is for the newsbreakers because when you look at the raw numbers, you're going to have more followers on X, so you're going to post to those people first, right? You're gonna, and I think that's like Shams is a big one of there. This the worst example of that with Shams was during free agency, where so basically Shams's pattern is he posts on X and then he 5 seconds later he posts on Threads after that, right? But during free agency, stuff's coming rapidly, right? So he can't keep up. So he just kind of did all the stuff on X, and then at the end of the day, he's like, "Oh, let me start copying these over," and he just started spam posting all these announcements that had happened hours before, and it kind of defeats the purpose because when it's free agent day, you want to know now, right? And by that point, everybody already knew what happened. There was no point to his post on Threads, and I think it's you wonder if there's an opportunity for a more coordinated movement. I think Meta has done a good job of drawing attention to Threads. They've done stuff on national broadcasts and partnered with the networks to get people onto the app and all that. But I find myself feeling that when it comes to Instagram Threads, are we really just kind of signing up for the same situation but with a different person, right? How much more do you trust Mark Zuckerberg than Elon Musk, right? And that's the real sticking point to me. Are we just kind of repeating history there? It's why I'm encouraged, or excuse me, discouraged all the time by how little traction Blue Sky gets. I wish it would get more. And I think about a podcast I listen to all the time is Ringer Tailgate from on Spotify, and this is a college football show with Tate Frazier, Joel Anderson, and Van Lathan. And Joel is on Blue Sky, and he posts about Blue Sky things he has said on Blue Sky all the time, and it's kind of treated as a joke, right? And in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of looked at as a joke. Now, Van himself has got onto Threads lately, which is a great development because he's been on Twitter for exclusively for the longest time. And I think that's the silver lining. More people are trying one of the other alternatives out there, even though they still like to use X. And, you know, from the perspective of their platforms are built, their algorithms are curated. I kind of understand why they haven't wanted to leave. But at the same time, when an app is causing so much harm, and I think if there was ever anything that that really everybody could unify behind, even with our fractured political environment, is that using AI to generate pornography or pornography adjacent content of somebody who's not a legal adult of a child is the line for a lot of people, right? And you just start to wonder if this type of stuff continues to happen on X, how much longer can it withstand it before it just devolves into Truth Social with better PR and less ads, right? And that's kind of something that I want to pay attention to because a lot of these bigger personalities are still on X, and it seems like they have no intention of leaving because they're going to continue to post where the audience, where they presume the audience is. And I wonder if it's maybe a little bit of a commentary about us as sports fans, and also a commentary on how the melting pot of sports fandom is reflected in the social media choices because you have a lot of people on Threads who may lean maybe a little bit to the left politically, and a lot of people who stay on X may lean to the right politically. And then the people on the super far left are on Blue Sky, maybe the super far right are on True Social, which I don't think any sports journalist really has a presence on. Maybe the Outkick that guys do, like Clay Travis and all that. But it it's something that I find troubling, and that I wish that more high profile sports journalists and sports media personalities would do. I think getting somebody like a Colin Cowherd to switch over would be a huge deal. Stephen A. Smith, as much as we may not like him, that's a big deal. If he started posting more on Blue Sky or Threads, right? And I think ultimately what we all want is to have a vibrant sports conversation free of bots and free of bad actors. And you don't get that without the people on the ground doing the reporting actually using the other platforms. So I'm hoping that in 2026 we see more migration, more people utilizing these other platforms. And like, again, Blue Sky, for example, does not deprioritize link sharing, right? Which is something that both X and Threads do. So you would think if you're somebody who writes for the Athletic, or you write for ESPN, or you write for SI or whoever, why wouldn't you want to be on a platform that actually promotes links and try to drive people over there? So I'm hoping we see more. I'm hoping we see more acceptance of these other platforms, and time will tell how this all shakes out, and time will tell if people still want to use this old platform that is really feels like devolving by the day. So love to hear your thoughts on this. If you are an avid X user, have you switched over to Mastodon, Threads, or Blue Sky? Do you not care about social media anymore? We'd love to hear all your thoughts on that. Great thing if you're watching on YouTube and Spotify, you can comment on these episodes. So, but that's going to do it for another issue, like it's a magazine. That's another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you as always for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow and a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you as always for tuning in for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast.